Welcome, everybody. This is the 65th episode of Let's Do Lunch, the daily webinar where we talk about the future of entertainment every Tuesday. We also do the business of streaming on Mondays, the business of games on Wednesdays, the rights tech roundtable Thursdays, and the business of music on Fridays. So please introduce yourselves. You can see at the bottom nav, there is the chat button, and that's where you can say hello. When you do introduce yourself, make sure to change the drop down from all panelists to all panelists and attendees so that everybody can see your posts. And when you have questions for the panel, you can put them in the Q&A area, which is just to the left of the chat. All right, so today we have David Bloom, senior contributor from Forbes and Tubefilter, back on the show, and he is here with Dane Smith from the third floor. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hey, glad to be here, and thank you to everybody who's showing up. I think we'll have a few more filter in, a few thousand more filter in for this conversation about visualization. I am delighted to have Dane here with me to talk about this. My backdrop is one of the ones that the Star Wars people put out on StarWars.com some months ago, about the time the quarantine kind of hit in earnest. And I chose to put it up because Dane is a vice president of the third floor, a company that focuses, so to speak, on visualization technology. When we talked on Friday, you said you are already working on the third season of The Mandalorian. And that is both surprising and not surprising, but it talks about something that speaks to certainly the long development times for even TV these days, because they're putting out entire seasons and stuff. So you guys have your hands in lots of things. So let's start with just, Dane, if we could, A, welcome, and B, tell people what visualization really means. We always think about pre-visualization, and now we're just visualization.
Right. So I'll talk a little bit about the legacy, but just as a point of clarification, I'm not actually on set on The Mandalorian. I would love that. We have very talented people that we've trained and developed over the years that are tasked with that. But yes, you're right. We are well underway in season 3, and there's a lot of activity in the space of real-time visualization and AR wall, and we're going to see more and more of it because there's this unbridled appetite for content going on right now as a result of the pandemic. Visualization is actually a very old technique. If you look back to filmmakers like Hitchcock, he would famously draw out every single frame to exercise some control over what was going to happen on set. And a lot of this
he was sort of notorious for wanting control over everything. Including Tippi Hedren, if I recall,
exactly.
To her chagrin, and Jason, Jennifer, what was her? Vivian Lee.
Vivian Lee, that's right. Yeah. That's right. But it did, from a technical and producerial standpoint, it is very sensible to do that sort of isolated exercise of planning everything out, having a blueprint that you can hand off to all of your department heads and prevent the same questions being asked repeatedly, or having things happen that are different than the way you imagine the process to go, because the written word is very different than the medium we work in, which is visual. And then if you add into that breaking the frame and pushing the camera through the Z-axis, you're no longer able to really explain that visually in storyboard form. So you bring in 3D software, and now you've got my animators that are zooming the camera around and creating edits, and an editor tying all of that together. You're adding audio, and that's previs. And for many years, that would serve as a way to prove concepts, get financiers, producers, and studios comfortable with where they were headed with the project, particularly when the project, as we got into the 90s and a lot more CG was being used. If the project featured a lot of work that was going to be done in post-production, green screen replacement, the leap that you would have to make in your imagination to visualize what was happening could lead to problems if it wasn't carefully mapped out. So the business
that seems like that would be a gigantic hole. It's like,
Right.
If you're doing Lucas and you're going into a galaxy far, far away, you've got an idea in your head if you're George,
Right.
but there's no way to really convey that unless you just start mapping it out, right?
Right. And three things about that. That's a great example. One is there may be someone with a better idea. And the great filmmakers and the great leaders, you know, the best idea always bubbles to the top. So there may be another way to solve the visual problem or improve the visual quality of storytelling. Also, left unchecked, George, using George as an example, would be surprised in post or on set with what he saw. And at that point, you know, it's like a wedge. The longer you're in production, the more expensive things are, and the more likely you are to have a request turned down if you're a filmmaker. That's too expensive. Let's find another way. But in the early stage of visualization, it's all about creativity. It's all about iteration and trying out different ideas, because the footprint is very small and the spend is very small, or at least it was. And
yeah, back in the day.
Yeah, way back when. And that still happens to some degree today, but with the advent of 3D software and a whole generation of filmmakers that grew up with gaming and the content that was created collaboratively, Minecraft. And another aspect of this, or another layer, is the globalization of visual effects. It was, you know, largely the domain of a few practitioners in Southern California. We started with these SGIs that were hundreds of thousands of dollars. There were only a few of them available. Most of them were sequestered in the military's hands, but a few of them fell into entertainment gurus' hands, started to be used to create 3D representation of imagery. And so if you think about that, it's very difficult to be trained on a device when there are only a few of them and the expense and the bar is that high. So a community built up around the technology. If you take a few leaps forward and you see the democratization of hardware and software take place, and then you add in tax credits and the globalization of our business, you now have people working in Korea, Mumbai, and Toronto, Canada on the same project.
And it's even more important now with the challenges we're having with physical production in the United States, certainly, but you know, around the world, you're able to cherry pick some of this stuff. Netflix have certainly taken advantage of it. They talked about it in their earnings statement last week about how, or their earnings call last week about how they were able to restart production in a lot of places, but they couldn't do it in India, couldn't do it in most of the U.S. So they had a couple of shooting days here in L.A. last week, but they've had to globalize, and that's what they do. That's part of their practice. I think it's probably going to be that practice throughout Hollywood, right? I mean, that's just what you're going to have to do for the foreseeable future.
And a lot of what's happening in this pandemic, not all of it, but a lot of what's happening is the acceleration of trends that were already present. So the globalization of visual effects, the reluctance of people to contribute to the carbon footprint. So why are we all getting on jets and going to Eastern Europe when I can create Eastern Europe? I may even have it in my virtual backlot, put it up on an LED screen, turn the camera on, and if all the technology is working, it's the difference is minimal or non-existent.
How big is your that makes me wonder, how big is your virtual backlot? I mean, you guys, you told me on Friday that you guys have been involved. You'll be in about 100 productions, those big ones I mentioned, The Mandalorian, the Avatar sequels, the spin-off of Lord of the Rings, the series that's the $500 million that Amazon's already spent on that. But that's just 3 of 100 productions of various sizes that you're involved in.
So we've got a few footprints around the world. We're in Atlanta because that's really a hotbed of production, and a giant talent base has grown up there. And we actually have a physical location there. We work all over the world, but we have physical locations in Atlanta, our main studio in Los Angeles, a studio that's been around for 5+ years in London, in the VFX hub there. And we just
even that's a management even that's a gigantic management challenge, those digital assets, right? Just try finding, that's like finding, I'm thinking of the Raiders of the Lost Ark,
push that famous
stuck away in the Smithsonian,
pushing that cart into the undescribable rows and rows of boxed up artwork. But it is a management challenge, but it's also a challenge each time a new method of production comes out, because we're in the era of game engine now. So those assets that were designed in a 3D software package can't be nimbly popped into a volume that is driven by engine, there's some optimization that has to happen. So we're constantly curating and developing and managing that catalog of assets, but we do have quite a few. The challenge, though, is original assets, because every film has some original creature, some original setting, and even the existing backdrop often needs to be tweaked. So there is some work involved in modernizing and repurposing that content or that inventory so that it can be deployed. I also
do you have Baby Yoda running around in your backlot?
There's some things, there's some lines we just can't cross here today, but I think you know the answer to that, and I'm mum on the subject.
And if anybody is going to complain that that's a spoiler alert 8 months after Disney Plus launched, I have no sorrow for that.
Right.
None.
Yeah.
It's on them.
Yeah.
You know? But
yeah, it's no longer a spoiler alert.
Right. So you've got a lot of stuff. You've had to figure out how to manage it. This is an interesting notion, though. So you talked about this transition from the Maya and other 3D software to the, I guess it's the Unreal Engine is the big one, but Unity too. I've interviewed, and in fact, I told you Friday, you know, I did a panel for San Diego Comic-Con at home that will run in a couple of days. That features the head of the lab at Unity, which is the other big one. But you guys say you're saying it's really sort of settling into the Unreal Engine, which is used starting the game space.
Well,
and it's gigantic.
You know, you're right. We had to make some decisions as a company. There are a lot of competing software out there, and Unreal really started to embrace filmmakers, because these engines, remember, they come out of the world of games. So the reason they're so popular in filmmaking is if I'm playing a AAA title game and I suddenly decide to swing camera left, the promise of that engine is the visual fidelity will be perfectly maintained. We're going to keep you in that bubble and maintain the illusion that you're on a battlefield in World War II or on the planet Mars, whatever it may be. And that tool that allows you to do that is incredibly useful in our world of visualization, because the exact same process goes on with the director. And with episodic, and I want to talk about that a little, there's a huge shift towards episodic and away from features. The feature content is still a strong market, but I've never had as many projects come across my desk that are episodic in nature.
Well, it's because it makes sense for these guys to keep, I mean, now that we've all turned to streaming, right? You've got to keep people stuck in. You can, you can stick them on there a lot more when it's an episodic and they keep coming back, as opposed to that one shot. And when people can subscribe and unsubscribe, you know, with the click of a button, it's a different universe. So you got to keep them around, right?
That is the challenge, because these streaming platforms, you know, unlike my cable box, which would be a whole afternoon spent trying to decouple from that relationship, I can reach over with my thumb right now and sever my relationship with the digital platforms. So there is this marketing goal of teasing out new content, but it also allows huge IP to be expanded upon. A lot of the material we're working on now toggles back and forth between the feature world and the episodic world. And so for the fan and for the writers and creators, it's incredibly exciting, because you can take this detour with a couple of characters you're familiar with down this 10-episode road. And they're being very creative with the episodic framework. You know, some of the episodes may be 10 minutes long and others are 70 minutes long. We're no longer tied to this, you know, 1950s television schedule paradigm.
Right. That Procrustean bed. Yeah. I mean, this is an interesting thing, because I've heard some people talking about it. Like, you just think about, you know, the Disney people are certainly good at, you know, extending and milking and maximizing the opportunity with their brand. But think about the Marvel Avengers ping-ponging back and forth, as you say, from the streaming service to another big blockbuster film, back to the streaming service. And you got to do it all if you're going to be totally in the MCU. You've got to hit all that, right? So you got to have Disney Plus, and you got to go to the movie theater. So
the big change we're seeing now is producers and creators come in wanting to world build. They want to set the stage for a world that they can exploit stories that are in episodic form. They can create immersive experiences with them. It can drive a theme park. And it can also use the tried and true method of the feature trilogy. So the first priority of creators today is to establish the environment that we're playing in. What are the characters? What are the rules? And in my opinion, a lot of that comes from gaming as well. That is gaming culture. You're buying into the rules and the characters and the environments of this IP. And then you'll go on the journey, whether that's buckling up in a theme park ride or watching 10 episodes on Saturday afternoon on your favorite streaming platform.
Right. Yeah. Anne-Marie Piersimoni in the chat, an old friend who teaches at Cal State Northridge in the new media space. I'm not doing justice, but digital media, new media, teaches all that. She says it smells a bit like transmedia spirit. What we're talking about here, that's an old term. It's kind of a throwback, but really, I guess now the term is world building as opposed to transmedia, because you're building a world and you just have different vectors going through it, picking off something. So and that's where your stuff and the visualization really becomes vital, because you've got assets that can, with these game tools, go into lots of different things pretty easily. Right.
I got an email from a studio executive yesterday afternoon who's working on a franchise, and we're 2 or 3 features removed from it. We decoupled from it years ago, and they asked for a specific asset that we happen to have in our library, and we unearthed it and repurposed it and got it over to them. And it was another reminder that that's the world we live in today. The challenge of a creator now isn't what is the 3-act structure of the story you're going to capture me with on Saturday night, is what are the rules of this universe you're creating? And how large and expansive is it? And where does the storyline fall apart? Where are those weak points? And let's cement them, get them buckled down, that we can go on a journey that isn't limited by one format.
Yeah, I mean, I think it feels a lot. There was a great conversation, a podcast that Ezra Klein, the head of Vox Media, had with N.K. Jemisin, the wonderful science fiction writer. And she walked him through how she does world building for her Hugo-winning, trilogies, these gigantic sprawling stories that she does. But the process of world building, it plucks things from like Guns, Germs, and Steel, Jared Diamond's bestseller from the 1990s, about how, why some cultures in the world did well and others didn't, and what assets they had. Like what are the rules of the game? I mean, this goes back to games, right? So you're creating in a narrative space all that opportunity. Now, you as a producer, you're vice president, that's your title. But as a producer, you think of yourself as a producer. What are you producing? And how does that interact with the movie or the episodics producers? What's the lines of demarcation?
Our role at Third Floor is we're a vendor. So we're at the service of the IP and our clients. So the typical scenario is a project is greenlit, a script, an idea, a reboot, even a commercial. There is some transactional activity that takes place, and now the filmmaker is looking for a way to mount this production. And we have great ways of sourcing those relationships. And we also, after 15 years and working on 75% of the tent poles that are out there and a lot of the Oscar-winning VFX content, each project, as it disperses, the cinematographer, the director, the producer go off and seed other productions. And if they had a great experience with us, they're going to be calling. So we get a lot of demand early on, and we sit carefully with the producers on the client side and work out the creative. So our superpower at Third Floor is really the fact that as a family-run operation, we have supervisors that have been with the company for over a decade and worked on all manner of projects and are sought after. We use a process called casting. When a project comes in and it's, a automobile racing franchise with macho guys in it, who would be perfect for that is so-and-so. Let's get him in front of the director and producers and let's spin up some ideas.
So this is, you're talking about casting, essentially a creative person within your stable of talent and freelancers that you say, like, this guy's really good at creating cool cars, right? And making them look awesome, that kind of thing.
And then the other factor that's a lot more common these days is a studio is mounting an IP and they have a director and they really want to explore the director's vision. So there's something called pitch fizz, where we get in and start creating visuals and let the director lead the charge and then present that material internally so that the studio can get comfortable with the vision, the direction the IP is going in, because brands are really more important than cast these days. I mean, if you're talking about the top 3 franchises in Hollywood, they're infinitely more important than who you're going to cast as the leading actors or the director. And so the director is being put to the test visually. That's another aspect of it. But really, at the end of the day, it's a play box that we build to start to assemble that world and go on a journey and really flesh out any of the visual environments, characters, story beats at a very inexpensive and iterative end of the wedge before we get into stepping on set. And once we step on set, actually before we step on set, but definitely once we step on set, it becomes more of a technical exercise. We're taking that imagery that's been signed off on and putting it in the viewfinder.
It's kind of like, though, I mean, I think what I bounced off of you Friday was, it's like the lookbook on steroids. You know, the directors used to have, like, here's like my influences visually and all that, and this is like my Babylonian influence, and this is my, I don't know, my Art Deco influence, and I'm going to mix those together and it's going to look like this. And this is taking all that and really helping them hone it, for one thing, and actually make it more explicit and defined, but also allows an opportunity for that feedback loop before everything's been locked down and it's too hard to change. So that's the other thing. You're saving money by doing it on the front end, right?
Well, and also you are a trusted member of that group or community because you're grounding it in reality. Will that techno crane fit on the stage you've rented? Can the camera fly through that wall? Are you on the lens you're going to use on the day? I mean, the sacred trust between the filmmakers and third floor is that we're not going to present something to you that you're going to fall in love with, and there is no practical way you can film it. You know, so we're also doing something called tech viz, and very much putting the visualization through its paces and making sure it's going to work on the day, and that visual representation is what the director, producers, and creators had in mind.
You're actually getting down to the point of, okay, this is the lens you will use with your Ariflex or your, you know, whatever it is, your bed or whatever, and it'll be this lens and
this camera back. You know, we can, with the tools we have, like Pathfinder that our CTO Eric Carney just created, I can tell you the direction of the sun in St. Mark's Square at 5:20 p.m. on November 12th. You know, we can get to that level of detail very inexpensively and very rapidly. So the director is often holding up an iPad and we're combining the physical and digital world. There's a very small group, 2 or 3 people supporting the director. There isn't the pressure to perform that there is on set. And you can play, you can try different angles, you can try different approaches and come up with ideas before you present them as your final.
One of the things I find interesting about this is how it shifts the I guess the center of gravity, for want of a better term, for a project. You know, 20 years ago, we started getting these gigantic visual effects teams coming in kind of after the fact, right? It was like you shot the thing, right? But basically all the work got done for the next year by teams sprinkled across the globe, working like, you know, ants in their little cubicles on, as you said, the SGI machines or whatever, and doing all that. And it's all now, not all, but a substantial portion of it is now moved to the front.
Yeah, if there's a fulcrum, it used to be tilted. The visualization, casting, script approval, that sort of thing was the thin end of the wedge, and it gradually increased. And the other thing that happened back in the 90s is the more you got into post-production, the less control the creators felt.
Absolutely.
It was sort of this black box. I mean, Maya was a completely mystical software. It's like you just
it still is.
slide your check under the door and hope for the best. And don't make the VFX artist grumpy, you know, because they may not turn out a great product. There was a balance of power that shifted to technical people in post-production that a lot of creators became more and more uncomfortable with. And it's almost like that fulcrum is now tilted to a level playing field. I worked for many years in post-production, incredibly proud of some of the contributions we made at companies I've worked with over the years. And there are insanely talented people working in that field. But at the end of the day, this is a dictatorship run by a director. There is a director's vision that we need to service. And I feel like a large part of that is best done before we step on set.
Yeah, it's actually the directatorship, not the dictatorship.
Exactly.
Directatorship.
Exactly.
But that being said, that is an interesting thing because, as you say, you used to do all your stuff and you had it in your head and then you handed it over and you hope to God what comes back is not going to make you cringe.
Right.
And it's not just the director, of course, it's the producers and it's the studio and it's all those guys. So this can save a lot of money too, right?
Well, and it also doesn't force the creative into a box where they're compromising. They're not being told, well, that's a great idea, but at X number of dollars per day in post-production with this AAA facility, I'm sorry, it's just not possible. Let's find something else. Whereas in visualization, it's entirely possible. And what about these other 4 ideas? And the other thing is it creates a partnership between the visualization studio and the finals house, because the finals house, when I worked in finals, we were always at a disadvantage because we didn't have the direct input from the director. We weren't there in the early phases of development of the idea. Well, now we are. And the producer can start to engage finals houses early on. So you're not getting to version 37 of a shot before the director smiles. You're getting there on version 2 or 3 because the visual effects vendors were tied into the process from the very beginning. And we're creating assets, if we've done our job well, that port right through that timeline. So the producers are smiling because they're not paying for the same thing twice.
Right. That saves a lot of money and time. I mean, so you can hit your stuff. Now, I want to do a little quick shout out. Everybody, please post your LinkedIn link. And this is one of the nice things about this is using the chat room to post your LinkedIn and connect with other people in the business. Go ahead and post those. Please put a question or two in the Q&A and we'll lob those in. And but we're about to have a poll. And I'd love you all to answer the poll. But we'd like to make this as interactive as we can in what's mostly a conversation between me and a really smart guy. But if you have any questions about Viz and where it's going and where really production is going, I think, because Dane, you've been at this for a while. Beyond that, I guess you've got these giant marquee projects you're involved in, but out of that 100 that you're involved in, I'm curious about where this goes in the future of production down to much smaller projects. And so talk about, from your standpoint, whether it makes sense for this for the indie film, for the $20 million film, for the film that's popping up on the streaming service that maybe isn't their marquee project, but it's the one they're using to fill out their offerings. That's $30 million. I mean, like where's the cost benefit cutoff?
So we've been talking about budgets, and I have a theory about budgets. I don't think anybody gets an award or accolades because on a $30 million budget, they saved $300,000. I really don't think anyone cares, because once you've been awarded that $30 million purse, the idea is you want to maximize the production value. You want the greatest possible result you can squeeze out of that budget on screen. That is the art and technology. That's our goal and mission. So if you have that in mind, it really makes sense to engage with a visualization studio and look at points in the script that would benefit from being fleshed out visually. Because if you and I read a paragraph of text, the image that we have in our head is different. And that can be true if we've worked together for 20 years. But once I put something on a screen, on an iPad, on a phone, and show it to you, that barrier's removed. And we either agree or disagree on the imagery, but we have a clear path forward. And that momentum and that confidence translates down to everybody on set. So a director who is doing an indie, and we do a ton of them. Again, 100 projects a year, 4 to 6 of them are tentpoles. So most of what I produce is indies, game cinematics, commercials, one-off moments in, I'll name a couple of titles like Mrs. America, the feminist 70s documentary series.
I think it was technically an anti-feminist documentary.
Yeah, that's right. It was Phyllis Schlafly. Sorry.
It was Phyllis Schlafly,
who was not feminist.
Yeah, it wasn't technically
you'd
a
be surprised to
document.
learn that we contributed to that. The Joker, we contributed a scene because the directors and the creative people involved had worked with us before on a tentpole or on something that was a little more green screen CG driven. And they realized, in this scene where someone's going to come running down a staircase and there's going to be action and we're going to have a lot of camera motion, we'd really benefit from a few minutes of visualization. And we're able to surgically go in, take those script pages, come up with a proposal, start with a very small footprint, which is going back to this Hitchcockian method of drawing, only now it's done on a Wacom tablet with a pen. It's all digital and I can send it to you immediately, but the premise is the same. And then we drop it into an Avid and cut it into a timeline. And now we're getting into the motion and pacing. We put some audio behind it. And very quickly, you can start to see the result. You can sign off on it. And then we can back out of that and extract the information required to shoot it. So the crew that you are fielding, whether they're experienced in visual effects or not, now have clear marching orders. And most importantly, they know beyond the shadow of a doubt that the director signed off on this. This is the mission, just make it look better. And that's a really powerful tool. And sometimes this is a few days work, low 5 figures, transactional experience for the client. And that is most of the work we do.
Are you seeing this happening? I got to think that commercials have been all over this. Commercial production's been all over this for years.
Mm-hmm. There's a lot of growth in that area. The truth about commercials is a lot of the high-end commercials employ directors that are really well-versed in visual effects. And I believe, I'm not in the room, but I believe that a lot of times these projects get greenlit because they want an attention-grabbing piece that's going to go up in the Super Bowl.
How do we get Michelle Gondry to do a
right.
cool ad for us?
How do we get, right, exactly. Michelle Gondry and Diet Coke, let's put that together. What does that look like? What is he going to bring to the party? And the first people that they call are third floor visualization service. Because they need to get something more than a great pitch or a deck in front of the people that are financing this.
Yeah. Now, real quickly, Laura, could you put up the poll? And we don't get to vote because you guys know what our opinions are, but there's a poll. Please take part. It's really kind of some quick sense of the room about folks, whether you're using it, whether you think it's an opportunity, how much you've used it, things like that. And we'll go into some of your all's questions now while folks are answering the poll questions. They won't take long, and we'll come back to those. But real quickly, again, make sure to put your LinkedIn into the chat room, put your questions in the Q&A, all very complicated, and make sure it says to all panelists and attendees so we can see it. Though I do note that Phil Lelyveld, who's never been a rule minder, works at the USC Film School's Entertainment Technology Center, asks how you secure because Phil is all about securing the assets. He asks, how do you secure the assets while they're being worked on by a distributed workforce? Is everything done in the cloud? And that's a technical question, but a really, I think, challenging and interesting one at this time.
So it's a distributed architecture. And what I mean by that is it's not cloud in the sense that it's in a server in a bunker in Iceland and we're pinging it and working on it. The material is actually under our control and on our server, but easily accessible through a variety of digital tools, to a large degree, tools that we created or that we at least developed the systems and pipelines for under Jeremy Otto, our head of technology. I mean, he's great. I'll give you an example. When COVID hit, we had a lot of shows that were in production. It was actually one of our busier periods, and many of them were IP that relies on secrecy. Creatures, characters, storylines, environments that at all costs cannot be released because they're not going to hit the cinema for 3 years. And that trust and privacy is very important. It's paramount. And Jeremy found a way to convince the powers that be, and these are really powerful studios, to allow us to have a distributed workforce that are in fact working at home, as I am now, on that asset. So in simple layman's terms, we're reaching from our box in our home into a server that Jeremy controls and has all of the security protocols in place for and is monitoring, and we're working in that server remotely.
Okay. Jeff Taylor asks, what's the project you're most proud of and why? You now have 2 children, and God bless you for the challenges of a 6-month-old and a 3-year-old. But this is asking you to choose between a much larger group of children. Which ones are you most proud of and why? Or some of the project elements that you've gotten your hands on that still amaze you? That's actually 17 questions in one. But projects you like and still amazing assets that you've created.
So I'm a producer at heart, and what that means, I'm not an artist, I'm not a technician. I assemble teams and manage them with a goal in mind, and it's a collaborative process. So what looks like a win for me may be different than what other people may attribute that to. But the recent win for me is an episodic called Stargirl, and it's Jeff John's creation. He is a very talented comic book writer and showrunner. And we met on the set of a very high profile tentpole, and he witnessed what Service Third Floor offers. And he got awarded a project called Stargirl that's based on his older sister who passed when he was quite young. It was a passion project. And he got funding from a studio, and he really wanted to invite us into this process, and we wanted to work with him. But the executives didn't see it. And this happens a lot.
They didn't see visualization is what you're saying.
Right, they didn't see visualization because they look at us and they see, Star Wars and Avatar and Marvel films, and we can't, we're trying to do the opposite here. We're trying to do something inexpensive, and it scares them. So we do ourselves a bit of disservice because of the large titles we're assigned to. But we were able to find a way to partner with the visual effects studio, prove our worth on the pilot, and deliver the entire series. And the reason I'm proud of that is twofold. The executive who I kept the email from saying, there's no way this is going to work. You need to abandon this idea, wrote me an email admitting that he was rethinking all of that based on the results, which he was very happy with. So that's one aspect of it I enjoy. But more to the point is collaboratively working with a finals house to deliver that vision within the budget and timeline that we were given. And these were some of the early days for OTT. I saw it coming. And a lot of times because of our position in the pipeline, we see trends coming, but it can be incredibly difficult to convince the people that manage the budgets that we're right, and this is coming and we should apply this. A lot of people are in a race to be in second place. People don't want to take the risk of right. jumping out in front of something. Right. And in this case we did, and it was hugely successful. So
that's an interesting win. That's an interesting thing because you do sit there on the front end, and I'm Paul Sweeting, who often sits in my virtual chair on the Thursday Rights Tech conversations because that's what Paul's into. But apparently he's also a bit of a game dude. He has a really interesting question. Since you sit on the Unreal Engine as your all's tool of choice, what do you anticipate being able to do with Unreal Engine 5 whenever Tim Sweeney coughs it out of his giant brain?
Well, that's $1 million question, and I don't think anyone outside of $1 billion question. I'm sorry, I stand corrected. The $1 billion question. I don't think anyone outside of a small cadre of people in his company know the answer to that. So I'm going to approach it from another place. While we're incredibly proud of the work we're doing in Unreal right now, it is early days in the fact that there's a lot of engineering that's required and a lot of testing that's required to get the desired result through the pipeline and up on that LED wall. And I can only imagine from the wealth of data that they've collected and the support that Unreal is offering to the productions we're involved in, that timeline will be compressed. And the points of entry to the process will be increased. More people will be able to use this technology more quickly, and the result will be greater as a result of some of the development that they're doing in Unreal 5.
So more of a democratization of the tools. I think that's an interesting point. First of all, Tim's had very long development cycles on Unreal over the last, 25 years since the first one came out, whatever it's been. So getting to 5 after all these years is a big deal. But you're right. How do you make these tools more accessible, particularly with his vision of creating the metaverse and enabling people on Fortnite to, do a bunch of different things and create their own spaces and express themselves in lots of interesting ways. you know, there's a really interesting set of opportunities there about getting to the metaverse, and he sees Unreal as one of the big tools to do it.
Right.
But you need to make it more accessible to the person who's really creative but doesn't have that Maya mindset, for instance, to be able to do things. Sam Miller asks, and this is really a separate question, but career advice: if you have production experience in a traditional media background and you want to get into virtual production, what's the best way to do so?
So if you're asking from a career development perspective, the best way to do it is go to the Unreal site and avail yourself of some of the training services that they offer and start to develop test projects using the engine. If you're asking from a client perspective, I would argue you're already in virtual production. We're just adding and augmenting what that means and what that looks like. And I think the answer that I will always give to that question is early engagement. It really doesn't cost anything to explore what these tools can do for your project early on. If you have a kernel of an idea and you're headed towards a direction creatively, there's really no harm in engaging a visualization service to start to explore what the rules of the road are, send you some examples of past successes, and allow that to steep into your creative process so that you're getting the most out of this new tool set. Because as great as Lion King and Mandalorian and these giant productions that get a lot of publicity, and deservedly so, are, there are hundreds and hundreds of other excellent examples of the use of this engine that are out there, and very easy to find.
Yeah, it's going to be nuts with the new mobile platforms and what's going to be possible, AR components and experiences that are going to be enabled by faster connections. I think a lot of that's really, really interesting. Speaking of all of this, it does make me wonder, since you're seeing the trends coming down, working on a project about where the world's going to be in a year and a half or so, you have to think about these kinds of things. What does Hollywood look like in 2022 when we're maybe in a somewhat different place, but not the same old place, I don't think. What's it going to look like?
I think we're going to continue with some of the trends that we've seen, and those are the migration of audiences to digital platforms. What I mean by that is, long before COVID hit, if you go to your local cinema on Saturday night and think about what it was like 20 years ago, it's a lot less frantic and crowded at a premiere now. There's been a migration to the home cinema experience and a migration to gaming, and that's only going to continue. And then on the content creation side, with COVID and social distancing and some of the early indications of what that's going to look like on set, the development is going to push much more into pre-production before you step on set, making those decisions about where people are going to be standing, how long it takes the rigging and gaffing crew to light that stage, and who needs to be present, are all questions you're very wise to pose in pre-production and not on the day. So I think there'll be a more and more emphasis on early decision making, which can only be really done in visualization, and less of an emphasis on the ultimate physical location. And I also think we're going to see a democratization of content creation. It's not all going to be the centralized hubs that we have today, the media centers. Once you free a production from this physical location and it's on a distributed platform, you can be anywhere in the globe and work. It allows me as a producer to hire people from all over the globe and work. So that erosion from a physical geographical location will continue.
You'll have more big outlets that can reach more people, but also more ways to create and get to those places. Laura, could you put up the poll results? We'll get through those real quick, and maybe we'll have time for another one or two questions. We had a lot of questions today, and I'm afraid I'm not going to get to all of them. But first one: how long do you think it will be before visualization technologies are used in virtually all film and production? 41%, 2 in 5 think it's already here.
Yeah.
Small percent think it's more than 3 years out, and in between about a quarter each. So we're well on our way, is what it sounds like most people think. Have you worked on film and TV projects that use visualization tech? About 40% say yes. And another third say it's not my job, not part of my work. If you worked with visualization tools on film and TV production, how many projects have you done? 1 or 2? About 13, about 1 in 6, 1 in 7 actually. Again, about 2/3 not my work, but I suspect with your evangelization here, there may be a few people saying maybe it should be part of my work going forward. But about 13%, about the same number, say they've done more than 10. So they're already well in, they're stuck in. And finally, can visualization tech make sense economically and creatively for smaller projects with budgets of, say, less than $20 million?
Yes.
Yes, 78%, 4 in 5 of you say, yes, they can save significant money, time, and or creative uncertainty. And it sounds like you believe that that's all true, and maybe it's not an or, it's definitely an and. I think we've got time for 1 or 2 more questions. One more question real quick. We'll stay in line with this. Laura Fong, another teacher of digital media production and pre-production and storyboarding, is a huge part of what she teaches. She asks, how would you suggest adding Viz Tech into her instruction or a particular software package to start with?
That's a great question. We're actually, and I was working on it this morning, we're about to launch a partnership with another visualization company. Believe it or not, you know, we're very friendly, the competitors. There's just so much opportunity out there that we're not, there's no animosity really.
It's not cutthroat yet.
It's not. There's just so much opportunity and so much to be gained. And our workforce, 40% of it's freelance. So a lot of the people that come through my doors come through my competitor doors. And there's a company called Halon that's very established in this world. Halon and Third Floor have partnered with the Visual Effects Society to launch a free learning platform for artists that are displaced by COVID and want to learn Unreal. So you can look for that if you're a Visual Effects Society member in the coming weeks. But to answer Laura's question, if you look at schools like Gnomon, that's already happening. There's already engine training happening. And I would strongly recommend that you reach out to Unity or Unreal and sock it into their training resources, because as much as I'm evangelizing for Third Floor and visualization right now, they are evangelizing for the use of engine. And a large part of that is training a workforce that this is very new technology to. And a large part of that is the next generation of artists coming up learning this technology. So direct outreach to Unity and Unreal will get you immediate results, Laura.
Absolutely. Unity just did some demos with the PlayStation 5, God, what, 2 months ago, a month and a half ago, something like that, and looked pretty awesome. Looked definitely awesome. I had Isabel Rivas on this panel for San Diego Comic-Con at home that's coming out in a couple of days, and she talked about what they're doing, and Epic's doing it every bit as much as they are, and they get it, you know, just like the older packages for nonlinear editing figured out, hey, we should get into the schools, the film schools.
Exactly.
Get people up there. Now we have a whole generation of directors who are as comfortable cutting and editing and doing all that stuff. And now I think that next step is going to be using visualization packages to be able to more fully realize that experience before you get on set. And we'll have to do that stuff on the front end to deal with the quarantine or the post-quarantine issues. So anyway, looks like I got to kick it back. I'm David Bloom. I am a writer for Forbes and TV Rev and Next TV and Tubefilter. And you can find me on LinkedIn at David L. Bloom and on Twitter at David Bloom. And Dane, where can they find you besides Scandinavia?
I'm right here in Los Angeles, and you can find a lot more information about everything we do at thethirdfloor.com. Plenty of video examples. I want to thank Digital Media Wire, Ned Sherman, and the eloquent David Bloom for inviting me into this today. This is a lot of fun.
Really appreciate it, guys. Terrific discussion. I'm sure all of us learned a lot here today, and appreciate your time. Tomorrow, folks, we have the business of games, and we have a real high-level VC joining us, David Packman from Venrock. He and Mike Vorhaus will investing in games. They're also going to take a look at blockchain and how blockchain investments are playing out in that space. So join us, same place, same time, noon Pacific tomorrow. See you guys.
Thanks.
Thanks.